if one can't let go, one keeps on thinking. One keeps on experiencing whatever it is that's happening. But if one is able to let this person go, at least momentarily, well, these are just similes and are not meaningful if that's not the way one feels about it, but it is the peacefulness. This is a very important inside possibility. Namely, that when we come out of that, we realize that utter peace is only possible when me has been laid aside. And it's such a relief that one can say that fourth jhana gives one a taste of what path and fruit's all about. It's at least one gets an inkling. All of them make the mind pliable, flexible, expansive, give the mind that ability which we need in order to see and experience absolute reality. I've already talked for an hour. Do you want to hear about the formless jhanas also, or do you just want to hear the first four? Okay. The first four are called the Rupa jhanas. Rupa, as you know, is actually matter, body, materiality. But they are translated as the fine material jhanas, fine material meditative absorptions. Quite a mouthful in English. The reason for their name is that we do know states like that in our ordinary life, caused by outer triggers and of far less quality than what we get in the jhanas. But we do know delightful sensation, we do know joy, we also know momentary contentment, and the depth of peace that we experience in the fourth would probably not be available to anyone in ordinary life, but we do know peacefulness. So there is a certain connection, therefore they're easily recognized. And also, the Buddha did explain them, maybe not at such length, but he did explain them. Whereas, when we come to the arupa jhanas, the formless jhanas, all he really did was give them names. With those names, we have an indication. In some suttas, there is some explanation about them. In the Visuddhimagga, there is a little more explanation about them. The fourth jhana is very often where the sutta stops, doesn't go into the formless. However, it is also said that the fourth one is, so to say, the necessary requirement in order to go into the formless ones. But it happens, actually, not infrequently, that people go from the third to the fifth and miss out on the fourth. And that's all right too, because eventually one can come back to it. Between each jhana, the Buddha recommended that we deliberately let go of that what we are experiencing in order to go a step higher. Because we know that there must be something which is more subtle and even more satisfying. Now, having gone into fourth jhana gives a feeling, as I said, as if we land at the bottom of a well. It may be as we land under an ocean wave. It may have nothing like that, but it's into depth. It certainly feels for everybody as if the mind is going down into depth. Now, fifth jhana is a different feeling altogether. It has a feeling as if the mind goes upward and outward. And the Buddha explained in one sutta that one, in order to experience fifth jhana, which is the infinity of space, one can actually start at the outline of one's own body, which is diffuse at that time, but it's still available, go further to the limits of the building, the limits of the place where one is, past the villages and forests, up to the sky, past the horizon, into limitless space. One may not need that. Having been able to do the first four, one may be able to let the mind just go upward and outward and experience the infinity of space. The infinity of space is, of course, much more difficult to describe because we don't have that in our everyday experience. While the mind is in it, it isn't concerned with anything. It's infinite. When one comes out of it, one realizes that within all materiality, and space is materiality, there is nothing which has a boundary, which has a limit. In other words, no personal identity. There isn't anybody in there. There is materiality, infinity of space, but within it, nothing can be found that has any sign, that has any form, nothing at all. Now, obviously, that's a very helpful experience. While we may know all that, we need to experience it. And again, anyone who gets into first jhana and is a diligent meditator should have no problem getting to fifth. Step by step, slowly, one after the other. Fifth and sixth are intrinsically connected. Just like in the first jhana, simultaneous with delightful sensation, joy arises because it's not possible any other way. Simultaneously with infinity of space, the infinity of consciousness arises. Because only infinity of consciousness can become aware of any kind of infinity. So what actually happens when we want to let go of fifth in order to go to sixth? We let go of that feeling, of that realization of unbounded space. And again, we can start out with our own consciousness. Wherever we think our own consciousness is, we go to that and start expanding. And again, expand and expand and expand until the consciousness becomes infinite. And again, we realize there's nobody in it. There's just consciousness. This is the experience which in the Hindu tradition is often mentioned as Tattvamasi. I'm that. Because I'm that, or that is me. There's no me, but the one who's experiencing that realizes it's absolute infinity. It's not enlightenment. but it certainly helps one to get a taste of what the Buddha talked about, and it certainly helps one to have some vigor, urgency to practice, urgency to get to path and fruit. Because the realization of infinity of space and infinity of consciousness makes it so obvious that if we think of ourselves as a person, the delusion is rampant. We know it's delusion, but the experience of it has to be there. The experience of that delusion is a real important milestone, because that experience of that delusion helps one even when there hasn't been path and fruit, because we can always remember what it was like when we experienced the infinity of space and the infinity of consciousness. We can bring up that feeling again, even in a daily situation, and remember, there wasn't anybody there. There just is mind and matter. Space is matter, and consciousness is mind. The infinity of that means an enormous expansion of the reaches of the mind. It doesn't mean that we all of a sudden know everything. But it does mean that we have a totally different horizon. We don't see ourselves as the center of the universe. Usually when I say that, people think, no, they don't see themselves as the center of the universe. Well, it needs to be tried out. We see ourselves totally different after that. We see that there is nothing but mind and matter. And again, I'd like to mention they are mundane states. They are not super mundane, but they bring us to that ability to have super mundane states. The next one after that is the base of nothingness, and mighty little is said about it in any of the sutras. What actually happens is that the mind, having experienced the infinity of space and the infinity of consciousness, looks at that and realizes that there's nothing in it of any sign, any form, only movement. And that is that movement, which is the particles coming together and falling apart, which the mind can then afterwards explain. But as it experiences it, this movement, there's nothing but this very fine, subtle, constant movement which is in everything, in all mind and all matter. And again, at that time, when the base of nothingness is experienced, the mind is still concerned and still connected to the infinity of space and consciousness. So sees in it that there's nothing other than this movement to be found. That's the greatest insight into impermanence that one can get. There's nothing there that's solid. Absolutely nothing solid can be found. Now obviously these are Rupa jhanas, the formless jhanas, bring depth of insight. And one can hardly avoid those insights. When one experiences these things, it is seemingly impossible to avoid these insights. And they are sometimes called the Vipassana jhanas, particularly 5, 6, and 7. The 8th one is a very peculiar one, a very particular one. It has a certain similarity to the fourth because it's very peaceful, but it's not